reading from the New International Version, John 19, 1 through 16. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify." But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jews insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jews kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar's. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement, which is in Arabic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of Passover week and about the 6th hour. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priest answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified.
Dissonance. Oh. I almost can't stand behind the pulpit and talk about dissonance, right? And this passage just brings about that dissonance, that uneasiness, that unrightness. It was a while back. We just moved into the neighborhood, and there was a block party kind of deal. And there was a fire out in the driveway, and we were talking around. The gals had went inside, I think, and it was just a couple guys out there. And I kind of asked how the neighborhood was. And it was good. And then this comment came about. "Oh, this neighbor, you got to watch out for them." And this led to a few more comments about that neighbor and a few more comments, and that uneasiness hit. The conversation had a turn to it. I felt weird. Dissonance. I could have stopped it. I mean, I didn't know him. I could have said, "Well, that's not very nice to talk about your neighbors like that." I could have said, "Well, what's good about them? What's helpful about them? Why? They've been in the neighborhood a lot. I bet they know the history of the neighborhood." I could have turned the conversation to something better, and I didn't. I laughed. Maybe I laughed awkwardly. I may give myself a little grace, but dissonance. And I would argue that the passage today is one of the most dissonant of passages in the Bible. We enter a season of Lent where we get to join in this dissonance, and this passage kind of brings it home to the dissonance of what is going on in a crowd. So imagine the scene with me. Jesus has been beaten, flogged. He has been joked about. He has been ridiculed. He has been mocked. And they put a crown of thorns on his head. And one passage talks about them pounding it on. Punishment has been happened, and they drape a robe around him and mock him. "Hail, King of the Jews!" Then Pilate brings Jesus before a crowd. And this is that dissonance. Here is your king. Here is this man that Pilate, we find out, believes he's innocent and is scared of this dissonant crowd. So Jesus stands before them bloodied, humiliated, exhausted, and the crowd erupts. Crucify him. Crucify him. Pilate hesitates, and then the leaders of the Jews push harder and say, "This is no friend of ours. Our law talks about killing him. Everything says this man must die. But of course, we can't do it. Crucify him. Crucify him. Take him away." And in the center of it all, Jesus says, "Nothing." Silence. I don't know about you all, but sitting with this passage, I couldn't help but ask, who's responsible? Derek said something last week that caught me in a new way, that Jesus, in his conversation with Pilate, said, "If my kingdom was like yours, my people would fight back." And here we see Jesus being silent. So who's responsible in this dissonance? Was it the soldiers? They were obviously cruel. They were mean. They mocked him, but they were just doing their jobs. They're following orders. Was it Pilate? I mean, we get a mixed review of Pilate in this passage. He had the authority to release Jesus. He tried, we could say. But he was afraid of the crowd, afraid of losing control, afraid of Rome, his own people. He was afraid of looking bad. He was afraid of disobeying Caesar. Oh, but was it the religious leaders? They were protecting their power, protecting their system, but they were protecting what was sacred to them. There is no God but God alone. And Jesus claimed to be the Son of Man. Maybe that's too much grace for him. Was it the crowd? They had the opportunity to release Jesus as well. And they called out, "Crucify him." They demanded blood. And then the truly dissonant piece of this passage for me is they shout, "We have no king but the emperor. We have no king but Caesar." Oh. A people longing from liberation for the very one they are crying, "We serve the empire." I can't help but wonder, where would I be in this? One of the things that this story kind of seems to reveal is how systems of injustice work. They rarely depend on one single villain. And it seems like Jesus didn't die because of one single person being responsible. These systems of injustice, they're upheld by many different people playing different roles in the system. Some hold power like Caesar or Pilate, or even the religious leaders. Or, as we see in this passage, some hold power as the crowd held power. Some enforce the power like the soldiers. Some simply go along. And before long, these lines blur and you don't really know who is responsible. Are they bystanders? Are they perpetrators? Are they victims or participants? You don't really see who feels trapped by the system and people who quietly benefit from the system. Dissonance. We come from the line of Anabaptists who fought against this dissonance. Our Anabaptist tradition has always taken this moment very seriously. The early Anabaptists looked at the cross and saw something deeply troubling. Both religious power and political power at work together to execute Jesus. The empire, the religious establishment, the crowd, all align for one moment against the Prince of Peace. And realization shaped the Anabaptist movement. It led to our spiritual ancestors to ask a difficult question. What does it mean to follow Jesus in a world where the system of injustice and power systems often oppose the way of love, of peace? We have believed the answer was simple and costly. We follow the way of Jesus, the way of humility, the way of enemy love, the way of peace, not with domination, not the way of violence, not the way of the crowd, but the quiet, beautifully stubborn way of Christ. But here's another dissonant. Crowds have power. When we are in a crowd, our voices so temptingly and so seducedly, oh, that's not a word. Terribly, our voice blends terribly with the crowd and responsibility gets diluted. It becomes easier to shout things we would never say by ourselves. Maybe crucify him. Maybe take him away. Maybe even we have no king but Caesar. And once that crowd gets loud enough, and once we add our voice to that crowd, it becomes hard to hear anything else. Compassion gets drowned out. It even gets hard to hear the voice of God. And in the middle of it all, Jesus is silent. No defense. No word of protest, no argument, no retaliation, just silence. But it's not the silence of defeat. I believe this silence holds the defiance and stubbornness to refuse to let violence reshape the heart of God. The silence of someone who trusts that God's kingdom is stronger than human cruelty. In a world addicted to power, Jesus embodies another way. And wait, there's more. There's another group we've not talked about. Disciples. Where are they? They loved Jesus. They followed Jesus. They learned from Jesus. They wanted Jesus. They wanted to protect Jesus. And in the midst of the moment that they could maybe turn the crowd, they are gone. And here's the dissonance. Maybe this hits close to home like it did for me this week. Because if we're honest, this may be the role we recognize most easily with. Not the soldiers. We wouldn't beat someone, right? Not Pilate. Many of us are not in this great role of leadership to be able to judge someone's life or death. Maybe not even the religious leaders who are trying to protect the sacredness. But maybe we're like the ones who quietly slip away. Hide. If they did this to Jesus, what are they going to do to us? Maybe this is the goal of Lent. I'll be honest with you, I really liked this theme beginning it. This uneasiness of Lent, this dissonance that we get to potentially set with for the whole season of Lent, and the uncomfortableness, the things that shout out to us now in this season, and I can't stand it anymore. I'm uncomfortable in the dissonance. Maybe that's the goal, to wake us up, to make us more attentive, more compassionate, more courageous, because when we recognize how easily we can be swept up in the crowd or how easily we can run and hide for our own safety, we become more capable of just going with the flow, of stepping out of the dissonance, of real change and movement. Being married to a teacher has given me certain opportunities and learnings. There was a story I heard when Mallory was teaching and left me in a group of teachers. And one teacher talked about an incident that they saw that has shaped the way they think about teaching and life in general. There's an elementary teacher, and they were on recess duty. And they were watching as regular recess happens, and everything was going good, and then this group started to form. And they could hear a shift in the conversation. In the joyous tones, there was an edge to the tone. a bigger circle began to form, and you could tell someone was in the middle of the circle getting made fun of. You could just sense that whole change in the recess. And it wasn't a fight where the cheers of fight were happening, but there was just that edge that changed. And the teacher said they were running up to go and stop it and to get order back. And one kid stepped up. And the teacher couldn't remember what phrase was used, but it was something like, "This isn't right. Those words aren't nice." And the crowd slowly went away. Order was restored because one person in the crowd decided to say no. I wish I was that one voice. That's kind of how crowds work. They grow louder and louder until someone interrupts the rhythm. Something changes. Someone steps out of the crowd, refuses to join in the shouting of crucify him, take him away. We serve no one but Caesar. And Jesus stands silent. I hesitate in this moment because it makes us leave the dissonance. But even in the dissonance, there is hope. The cross erupts the silence. It interrupts the violence. It interrupts our system of power. It interrupts the endless cycle of accusation and blame, not with louder shouting, but with a love so stubborn it refuses to hate. And maybe with all that, the invitation of Lent is simply this: may we sit in the dissonance long enough to learn again to listen to the quiet voice of Christ, the quiet voice of God that whispers, "Step out of the crowd. Choose mercy, choose truth, choose peace, choose love." Because the dissonant thing of it is that the voice of Jesus has never been the loudest voice in the room. But I will argue it's been the most stubborn and the one that has evoked the most change in the world.